Morning, church. It's been a good. It's been a good morning. That does sound a bit, funny. So we're journeying through Jonah, and if you're joining us today, we're up to Jonah chapter 2, and we come to a place where for Jonah, God's judgment and His mercy meet him personally. And as Greg was sharing earlier, Jonah, he was called by God to declare a prophetic word over Nineveh, and a nation that struck terror into the nations around it for hundreds of years. It had a track record of torture and glorifying death, really as a method of control. And actually, Greg mentioned he mentioned an article in the news this week that Mexican police had found 11 bodies in a car, and the hands and feet had been removed, and they were all just in a bag in the boot, and of course it's just this ongoing, the drug, the cartels and the wars that are going on in Mexico, and horrendous barbarity, and it's said that since 2008, that over 10,800 people have been, that they know of, right, have been murdered as a result of these, these cartels and the evil that's been going on. And you see, that's Jonah. What do you do? What if that's your son or daughter or husband, wife in that car, and God calls you to share the gospel message with the perpetrators? Would you go there? Would you tell them? What if they repented? How do you repent? What does that look like? It's not an easy question to answer. But that's what other hope is there? What hope is there for humanity? How do you transform a human heart that has gone to that level of evil and depravity? It's just better laws and system, more police. Is that going to fix it? The grief and the suffering and the anguish, the cries for justice. How do you reconcile that? And so Jonah runs. Man, he's like, no way. And he runs. And ultimately it's he didn't want to offer them even the chance. And I think we all can go, yeah, I get it. And an irony, is that he jumps on the ship, right, and he says he flees from the God of the universe who created the land and the sea. Where do you go, Jonah? Where do you go? And of course, he discovers he can't run from God. And really, it's at its root is sort of that it exposes all of our humanity's sin, right? That at the bottom of it, at the very root of it, it sort of goes right back to the Garden of Eden, that we doubt God's character. We doubt that He is good. We doubt that He has the best plans for us. So you know what? I'm going to make my own plans. I'm going to weigh it up, and this is what I'm going to do. This is the choice. This is the path I'm going to take. And so we reject what God's doing. We reject His solution, and we do our own thing. We find another source of guidance outside of God, outside of who He is, because we don't trust His character. And so Jonah tells us, that, man, if Jonah, a prophet of the Lord, because that's what he's called, right, that he can be in the dark about grace, that he cannot get it, that so can we, so can anyone. And all of his emotions, his fears, his prejudice sort of really stem from a blindness around grace. And often we're so blind we don't know we're blind. That was the case of Jonah. He didn't even see it in himself, right? He couldn't see his own failings and his desperate need for grace himself. And ironically, it's the very same grace that was offered to Nineveh. It's the only thing that could save him. And so he runs, and he had a better idea, a better way to fix things. He trusted his own instincts, his own intuition, his own wisdom instead of God's. And so the Lord pursues him in a storm of Jonah's, his own making. It's the storm of humanity's making. We all make the same mistakes. And yet even in it, you see, Jonah, at the end of the day, when he realizes that he's at fault, he offers his life for the sailors. And they throw him overboard because he knows, he knows what he's done, right? And so overboard he goes. And so we're going to read Jonah from Jonah 1:17. And it says, "Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And from inside the fish, Jonah prayed to the Lord, his God. He said, 'In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep in the realm of the dead, I cried for help, and you listened to my cry. You hurled me into the depths, into the very heart of the seas, and the current swirled around me. All your waves and breakers swept over me. I said, I've been banished from your sight. Yet I will look again toward your holy temple. The engulfing waters threatened me. The deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever. But you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I've vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And at the end of his prayer, the Lord commanded the fish, and it vomited Jonah onto dry land. Wow. It's quite an incredible prayer. And it's a poem, actually. It's a Hebraic poem. It's got the sort of a structure of a Hebrew poem. And I don't know, often we kind of skirt over, I sort of think, poetry, it's probably not a thing that I gravitate to, that I really sort of try to unpack. But actually in this poem, there's this really neat structure, and it's powerful. And so I want to sort of just undo the mechanics of it, and so that you can sort of grasp what the narrator, what Jonah is basically trying to is trying to give us insights, and his profound insight, his insight and discovery about grace. And so the word down, it's repeated multiple times in chapters 1 and 2. And it's like, so there's this constant sort of descent that Jonah's on. It's said actually right in chapter 1 that he went down to Joppa, which was the port, and he went down to the ship. And then from the ship, he went down into the ship's hold. And from there, he went down to the realms of the dead, and then down to the roots of the mountain. So there's this sense of Jonah that he's slipping, that he's descending, that he's going down, that everything in him is slowly getting stripped away, that's being pulled off him. And so this poem has this structure. So Nathaniel, can you show that first slide, the first slide there that I've got on that PowerPoint? Thanks, man. So this is the structure of a typical sort of Hebrew sort of poetry. We see it a lot actually in the Psalms, and so it consists of 5 stanzas, and then at the end there's a refrain, which means a repeat of the themes above. And so it goes A, B, C, B, A. So it sort of goes in and then back out. And so the idea is that it's emphasizing the shift, the moment where, which is at sea, where it's sort of at the deepest point, and it's highlighting this journey of Jonah. And so the first, at chapter 2 there, it's like a summary of his predicament, that he's descending to the realms of the dead. He's descending to the deep. The word deep actually is the same word as in Genesis 1 of the Lord, the Spirit hovering over the deep. And so the deep, it means chaos. So it's so death, chaos, the deep. It has that sort of deep, that's the imagery that it has. So he's going, I'm descending, I'm going down, and I'm down to the realms of the dead, to Sheol. And it says, but I cried to the Lord. It's like he's recognizing that actually that the Lord is his only hope now, that he is things, every plan B, C, D, and E, everything's getting stripped off him. And he's got no other options. And so in verse 3 here, he recalls the moment of being thrown overboard, where the waves are like crashing over him, where the storm that's been brought on by God, Judah was running from his call, is overwhelming him. That you can imagine, like it would have been possibly even at night, and he's been thrown into the water, and so it's this this moment in verse 3 of recalling the terror of it. And verse 4 is the centerpiece of his prayer. And it's highlighted because he says, I said. So he's quoting himself now. And he's going, I said, quoting himself, I've been banished from your sight. So banishment means no hope of return. You know the old movies where the good guy gets banished from the kingdom. And it's like, you are never to return. You've been banished from the realm. You're out of my protection. You're out of the king's realm. And so this is not him talking about his running, because that was his choice, right? He's saying now, he's like, oh man, I've been banished. So it's this moment where he's been thrown overboard. Like he's going to die. He knows, like, what? No, there's no life raft. There's no little, those things they throw out, and save people. It's like, he's recognized in this moment, it's like, I've been banished. I'm going to die. And I've sinned against God. So it's like the prodigal son, as it were, is that it's like, actually, there's no hope for me. It's like it's finally hit him that, it's when you're in a bit of a bad situation, you're like, oh, I think there's still an out, there's still an opportunity, there's still a way to escape. And the most sort of obvious memory I have of that was actually skydiving, and I, like Sam and me, we went skydiving in the holidays, right? And I remember paid the money, and I thought, man, I'm paying for this. I'm paying to jump out of a plane like this. So you pay it, and you think, oh, it's okay, I'm good, I'm still on land. And I put on the jumpsuit. It's okay, I can still get out of this. There's still an option. I jump in the plane. So that's okay. And it starts to circle. It takes 15 minutes to get up to 10,000 feet, man. From Motueka, you can see the North Island from there. There's no door in the plane. It's just open. And I'm sitting there, and I think, it's already in. You can still pull out, right? It's good, And then you see the light go on, and it's like, it's not so good. It's, hang on, wait a minute. And he slides you over to the door, but you're strapped to someone, right, which is really uncomfortable. And I had a big South African guy, who's I'm sitting right on top of, and it's like, and it's so loud you can't hear anything, right? And so he shuffles over, and so he's sitting on the ledge, right? My feet are just out, nothing, And I'm out like this, and I'm looking down, and I'm like, what the hell what am I doing? Like, honestly, that was my thought, was like, what are you doing, Iain? And and there's the rush, the sound of the wind, like it's deafening. And then all you feel is 3 pulses. And you're like, okay, I can't, and you're gone. That's it. There's no option. This is what Jonah's feeling right now. He's thrown overboard, right? And he's going, I'm banished. There is no plan B now. There is no escape. I am dying. And I've crossed the line. I've crossed God. As a prophet of the Lord, I've run. And yet, in it, right, it's incredible that he says this in the second half of verse 4. He says, but yet I will look again toward your holy temple. So it's like a looking back. It's like as he's descending into death, he looks over his shoulder, as it were, in hope. It's like, my only hope is the Lord. I have no right to even ask. And it's the looking is actually, it's the same phrase that Moses was instructed with the Israelites. Do you know the story where they moaned and complained again to Moses? And it says the snake, they all start getting, as punishments, the snakes, they started getting bitten by snakes, and thousands started to die. And Moses gets the instruction to make a bronze snake, and he says, put it on a pole. And it's like, if they would look up, if they would look to the pole, I will save them. And so it's the same phrase. So it's like, if you would but look to me. This is Jonah's hope. He doesn't know. He's like, but if I would just look to him, he may save me. And then the second half, you see, when you go back, so in part B in verse 5, don't worry, it's just the youth are just, they're not offended. They're just getting, prepping the food. And B, we're starting to step out, and he goes back to the engulfing waters. They threatened me, the deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around his head. So he's now recalling the drowning, the going down, the descent. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth barred me in forever. And then, you see, part A, it reflects to A at the top. So his distress, but he looked to the Lord, just as he spoke of the Lord, he had answered his prayer. So that's the structure of it, and it's emphasizing that Jonah all he had left was the mercy of God. That was it. There was nothing else that he had. And he didn't know, as he was drowning, what was going to happen. His eternity was at stake. And then he moves to the refrain. Can you show us the last? Thanks. Awesome. So this is him again, just repeating really the themes that his prayer had. So when my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose to you, to your holy temple. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them. Whoa. But hang on. Like, Jonah didn't turn to idols. He didn't start to worship other idols. He ran from the Lord, yes, but he didn't turn from idols. So who's he talking to? Or who's he talking about? See, the sailors, they started off in idolatry. They were praying to their gods, but then at the end, they come to recognize Jehovah. They come to recognize Yahweh, the God who Jonah loved and served. And so it doesn't quite fit with them. And many commentators think Jonah is speaking to you and I. He's speaking to the readers of his book. And he's saying, guys, don't worship false idols, things that cannot save you, things that cannot help you. And actually, when we do that, when we turn away from God, we actually block us off from His love and His mercy. And that's His plea in His heart. And He's like, man, do not worship the false idols. And we don't think of that often. Idols are not things, we don't have a sort of a statue in our room, right? But idols are things that we look to for security. We look to create value in us. We look for it to create comfort in us. They're the things that we invest our time in. So it can be friendships, it can be relationships, it can be money, it can be health, it can be all these things that we look to create worth in us, that we think they're going to save us. And Jonah's at this place and he recognizes that, man, at the end of the day, when our time is up, we have nothing to stand on. The only thing we have is God's mercy. And it's this appeal to us. Do you know the only difference between Christianity and all the other faith beliefs in the world? It's grace. It's all it is. It's God's mercy. Every other belief system is basically a self-help guide. You've got to do this, you've got to do that, you've got to try harder, you've got to meditate, you've got to pray, you've got to fast, you've got to do this, do that, tick all the boxes, and maybe you might be good enough. Maybe you won't come back as a grasshopper. Or whatever it is, right? The only thing that differentiates Christianity from every other faith belief is the grace. And this is what Jonah is saying. It is grace. But I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I've vowed, I will make good. And I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. Like, wow, what a statement. So he realizes that the only thing that we have is God's grace. Salvation only comes from God. It is the one thing, it is the only thing that can, that is the hope for humanity, that is the hope for us. And the question is will we receive it? For Jonah, grace and mercy took the form of a fish that swallowed him for 3 days and 3 nights. And it's interesting, it's not a case of when you get to the bottom, but it was only when Jonah turned and he prayed that the shift happened. Right, and so it's not just a case of sometimes, I think many people can testify of the stripping away at times, of going to dark places, of circumstances and whatever it looks like. But there is still a point where it's like, well, will you turn? Will you look up? Will you turn your face to the Lord and look for His salvation? So we live in a broken world, and God allows circumstances, difficulties, sometimes terrible tragedies, right? But He permits them to happen because He's given us free will. But He will use those things to reveal our own blindness, our own idols, and He'll strip those things away so that we learn to rely on Him and just on Him. See, Jonah had his own ideas. He had his own self-sufficiency, his independence. Maybe he had pride in his identity, in his culture as well. You know, we're the good guys. But all of that got stripped away. He went down and down and down until there was nothing left. But the only person he could look to was the Lord. And it's a scary place to be at the bottom. I want to share a video with you, and it's a young lad. He's 15 now. But he has experienced this process of being stripped back to the depths from the grief of losing his mum only at the age of 14. And he only shared this on Friday night, so 2 nights ago. And it's the first time he's spoken about the loss. and of his mum, Katie, which is Beth's sister. So he's my nephew. And so I want you to listen to a little bit of his story.
So if you don't know me, I'm Jared. I've been at Elevation Youth here for the past 3 years. And today I'm going to be talking to you about pushing through struggles with Jesus. So as we all know, life can be really tough sometimes. We all go through struggles like stress, family issues, loneliness, and grief. And when we're in the middle of it, it can feel like God is far away. It can make us feel like we're trying to push through on our own. But the truth is, struggles aren't a sign that God has left us. In fact, Jesus tells us in John 16:33, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I've overcome the world." That verse doesn't say if you follow God, life will be easy. It says trouble will come, but Jesus has already overcome it. That means no matter what we're facing, we're never facing it alone, whether we realize it or not. Point 1, struggles are a part of life. One of the hardest things about struggling is that it can make us feel like God isn't willing to help us, like he's watching from a distance. But Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." I saw this verse while reading the Bible a while ago. It really hit me hard. As some of you know, I lost my mom to cancer in February last year. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through. I remember the day the news came and the night that followed. I couldn't sleep. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what my life would be like from now on. I remember waking up and for a second everything felt normal. Then the weight came back and it would hit me all over again. It really was the worst thing I possibly could have gone through. There were days when I didn't want to do anything, days when I didn't even feel like praying. I never imagined I would lose my mom so soon. She was always there, always a part of my life, and then suddenly she wasn't. You don't realize how valuable something is until you lose it. The world kept moving forward, but I felt stuck, like a part of me had been ripped away. Grief is exhausting. It drains you in ways you can't even explain. And to be honest with you, it completely halted my journey with God. I went backwards, asking questions like, why me? Why out of all people me? But looking back at it all now, I can see that, especially in those moments, God was there. He was holding me up even when I didn't realize it. If you're struggling with something right now, I want you to know this. God is closer than you think. Even if you don't feel him, he's right there beside you, no matter what, because he loves you more than anything in the world. Point 2, lean on God's strength, not your own. One of the biggest things I've learned is that we're not supposed to go through struggles on our own. We're not meant to carry everything by ourselves. Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." For me, moving forward after losing my mum wasn't about pretending everything was okay. Things that help me and still help me are youth, talking to friends and leaders, playing music on stage, and just focusing on the task ahead each day. Maybe you have different things that will help you. It could be a hobby or a sport or even just spending time around people. For me personally, I get my energy from being around people and talking to them. Maybe your struggle isn't grief. Maybe it's stress, anxiety, or even bullied or feeling like you don't belong. Whatever it is, you don't have to deal with it by yourself. God gives us strength to take the next step, even when we don't want to, even when we just want to stop and give up. God has given you people you can talk to, youth leaders, friends, people that support you, and even me. If you're struggling right now, I need you to know this. God is still with you. Even if you're angry, even if you feel like he's distant, even if you don't understand, he has not left you. I won't stand here and tell you that everything gets better overnight. Healing takes time. Some pain just doesn't disappear, and some questions may never get answered. But I'll tell you this, you are not alone. God sees you. He knows every tear and every frustration, and he hasn't abandoned you. You are not alone. The truth is that he's holding you together even when you feel like you're falling apart. The truth is that he's working in ways you can't even see. And the truth is that he's strong enough to carry you through, even when you don't have the strength to take another step. So don't give up. Don't believe the lie that you're too broken or too far gone. Because God is not just walking beside you, he's carrying you. Just like he's carrying me. And that's my preach.
What an incredible kid, eh? To say that not even a year after losing his mum. And to speak to his peers, and let them into a bit of that journey, that he found God in the dark places, that he was allowed to protest, that he asked those questions. It's like he was saying, you're allowed to protest, but don't run. Run to him, don't run from him. And man, I take my hat off to him. He could have buried himself in gaming. He could have started to hang around with the wrong people. He could have blamed God and blamed the world for it and become bitter and resentful. But he chose to dig into his faith. He chose to look. He turned. And it's incredible that even in that pain, he actually chose to serve. He got involved in his youth band, and he's become one of the young leaders, I guess, in his youth group as well. And he's continued to serve. And he mentioned it himself that one of the things for him is that he didn't isolate himself, and he felt, and actually he allowed people to be around him and to journey with him. And it was like, I love that phrase he said, looking back, he said he felt like he was falling apart, but God was holding him together. So Jonah's bottom was he had to recognize and acknowledge what he had done. For Jared, the temptation was to shake his fist at God, and to blame him, and to choose another idol, as it were, to say, actually, if I was on the throne, God, if I was in charge, I wouldn't have done it that way. I've got a better plan and a better idea. I've got a better idea than you. But he chose not to. And there's this surrender that's happening in him. And as he shared, it's not that the wound is fully healed. It's taken time to process the grief, and he's still processing that grief. He's still working through it. But in it, though, he's turned to the Lord. So what hope is there for the world? A 16-year-old kid can show the world that there is hope to walk through. And it's God's mercy and his grace. That's all we have. And so I want to encourage you this morning with the words that have come out, that it's like the Lord's saying, he is with you, man. He is for you. Don't doubt his character. It's like even when you don't know and you can't see the plan ahead, and maybe you're wondering, how did I get into this? How am I going to get out of this? His call is just as Jonah's prayer is sandwiched between the Lord. The storm came, but he sent the whale, and then the whale spewed him up on the beach. It's like, and in the chaos and in the storm and in the depths, in the descent, he's still in control. And as Rachel's word and the other ones came through, he sees you, he chooses you, he delights in you. And so as the team come up for to close, I just want to encourage you this morning, if you're in that place, man, where you're crying out, then I believe the Lord, he wants to encourage you this morning. Don't isolate yourself. Get some prayer. Jonah's shift came when he turned, when he began to pray. That's when the up began. That is when the journey began. And it's the same with us. And sometimes it's really hard. It might take everything we have go, God, I've got to lay it down. And so I lay down all my ideas, all my opinions, all my whys, but I just look to you. I need you to hold me. I need you to carry me this morning. And if that's you, would love to pray for you and do that journey with you.